Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about Greek city-states. So we present this, make this thing small, hide that, and present. Okay, so the very first thing you need to do, I can move my face out of the way. I don't know why this is so hard to move. There we go. Is that you need to cover that learning target in your notebook. We're going to be starting with, I can compare the configurations of city-states, especially Athens versus Sparta. We're going to be on this one pretty much all week. So this is the only day you need to make sure that you cover that learning target. So make sure you cover that learning target. We're going to be on this for a while. All right, today we're going to be talking about one of my favorites. We're going to be talking about Sparta. So my favorite. But first we're going to talk about what city-states are. We haven't talked about that since way a long time ago. We were talking about Mesopotamia. So remember yesterday we talked about Minoans, Mycenaeans. They died out. The population kind of spread, and now we're talking about a lot of the city-states that are going to be on mainland Greece. But as you can see by this map, man, they're spread all over the place. The reason why, as you guys remember, hopefully remember from your geography stations, is colonies. Didn't have a lot of room to farm, a lot of livable land in the mainland peninsula of Greece, so they kind of had to spread out. So all of these little dots are all different city-states. The main ones are the ones that grew kind of here. We're going to be talking about this one. Athens and Sparta is like right underneath where I just clicked. So we're going to be talking about them too, but some of the more famous ones, Corinth right here, the people that came there from Corinthians. So a lot of them are in the Bible. Thebes, Delphi, which has a big oracle, the oracle at Delphi, which is Apollo's oracle, very famous place. Olympia, where they played the Olympics every year. So some of those are just kind of famous. But anyway, as population, trade, and wealth grew, the ancient Greeks began to build cities near coastlines, as you can see, all along these coastlines. They needed to have a place for trade. They needed to have a place that was easy to defend, and of course, food. In the middle of each city-state, there was an acropolis, and that is the highest point in each Greek city-state. This stone-walled fortress was the city's last line of defense. If someone broke into the city, they could get into the top of the Acropolis, and that could be how they defended. Remember, you got to have the high ground. So this is the Acropolis at Athens, which is still there today. You can see it's much higher than the rest of the land surrounding it, and that's where they had temples. This is the most famous one, Parthenon, which is the temple for Athena. So they called each city a polis. Get all these up here. Okay. Below the Acropolis was an open area called the Agora. This is an Agora right here. It had two functions. It was a marketplace where they could meet and trade items, get food, things like that. They also met here and would debate a lot of issues. If there was political issues and they needed to make a vote or decision, they would meet here and talk. Greek kings created city-states, which were the towns or cities in the surrounding land. Remember, we have talked about city-states back in Mesopotamia. The reason why they're city-states and not cities is because cities are usually like grouped together by country or whatever, where they all have a lot of common. They have the same laws. They have the same governmental systems. That wasn't like that in ancient Greece, and it wasn't like that in Mesopotamia. The city-state, and in Greece it was called the polis, was like a tiny independent country. It was self-governed. So like if you went to Sparta, it was run totally different than it was in Athens or Olympia or Corinth or any of those other places that I just pointed out to you on the map. They had different laws. They had different rulers. They had a couple of unifying features that's going to be mentioned in a second. But most of the time, they were completely different from each other. Ancient Greeks saw each other as members of their city-state, of their polis, and not Greece per se. The reason why these developed separately is because they were isolated. That influenced how they developed, and most of the time it was because of these mountains. The mountains surrounded plains and valleys that made it hard for some city-states to communicate and trade. City-states developed at the same time all over ancient Greece, but again, they developed separately. They shared some common things. That would be a language. They all spoke Greek. They shared similar religious beliefs. They believed in the same gods and goddesses, although if you went to different places, they held different gods and goddesses to a higher standard. For example, in Athens, we know that they obviously were named after Athena, and there's a whole story surrounding that. But they held Athena to a high standard. But if you went to like other places, they wouldn't have. They would have their own god and goddesses that they thought were the most important. They also shared a very similar heritage, which meaning like a lot of their architecture, mythology obviously came from the Mycenaean and Minoan civilizations, and culture, dressing, eating type things. They shared a lot of that the same. Each city-state had its own customs and laws, though. Citizens saw themselves, like I told you, as members of city-states, not as Greeks. So sometimes they would get along and sometimes they would fight violently. The very beginning, I can move this. Very beginning governments in these city-states were an aristocracy. Hopefully we remember that from our vocab, but an aristocracy is a government ruled by a small group of wealthy landowning families. So only the people that were landowners, which means they were rich, they were wealthy, could make the decisions for everyone else. So like we've all talked about before, rich people want to stay rich. They're going to make decisions that will benefit them, not necessarily benefit the people that are underneath them that are poor. So in the 600s, poor people getting tired of being taken advantage of and, just basically not helped. Tensions grew with aristocratic landowners, and the growing merchant class challenged the aristocratic rule. They thought that other people should have a say and not just the rich landowners. As trade grew, the merchants became more powerful, and the wealth was not spread evenly amongst the population, which means there would have been a high number. The wealth would have been concentrated up here, and there would have been a big chunk of people down towards the bottom that didn't have a lot of wealth. Some powerful men took power as a tyrant. Now, I want to point out first that a tyrant is not someone who takes power, or a tyrant is someone who takes power by force and rules with authority. It is not necessarily a bad person. They don't necessarily do bad things. A lot of times when we think of tyrants in our day and age today, we think of people that are just not good rulers, bad, evil type people, but that's not the truth. The truth is they take power by force. They rule with like sole authority, but they could make decisions that are good for a lot of people. Some tyrants were mean, but others made positive changes, including giving land to the landless and worked to the unemployed. Not everyone liked how they'd ruled, so merchants formed an oligarchy. An oligarchy is a few powerful citizens rule government, but the majority of the people still do not have a say. Some city-states wanted to give citizens a greater voice, which would lead to a new type of government, which is, shocker, democracy. So here are some symbols of different city-states. They all have their own like little, I guess, symbol, like Sparta would wear theirs on their shield. Growing city-states meant growing populations and new problems. This would be from where your colonies came in when you did your stations the other day. Limited farmland led to hungry, angry people. Between 750 and 550 BC, city-states waged war with each other for control over natural resources. So first they tried fighting each other. When that didn't work, they set out colonies. Which, here we go. The population became too big for Greek city-states, so people started colonies and that settlements in new areas. And all this red here is where a lot of them settled, all over the place. Colonies were spread to Italy, France, North Africa, and Western Africa from 750 to 550 BC. While the colonies were self-governing, they kept close political and economic ties to their parent city-states, just like in the beginning the United States did with England. They would rule themselves. In fact, they signed the Mayflower Compact when the Pilgrims first got here, and that helped them set up how they were going to rule in their government systems. But they still had to abide by the laws, taxes, all of that of the parent of the colony, which would have been Britain back then. The flow of new resources to and from the colonies increased the production of goods, which were traded at home and abroad. The introduction of coins after 600 BC increased trade too. So a lot of these colonies would grow food and send a lot of these resources, or if they found metals or whatever, they would send these resources back to their parent city-state, and then that was used in increasing production of goods and things like that. So they just had more. It helped them. Also, settling in these states helped cultural diffusion. Cultural diffusion is when you take your culture, it spreads all over the place. So sea trading helped it. They would spread their ideas to other places. They also used ideas from other places. So when we talked about Egypt, one of the things we talked about was the golden ratio when they painted their, you probably don't even remember this, but when they painted their people on the side of, temples and stuff, they used a special ratio to paint it in perspective right. Greeks took that and they used it in their own art. They also learned about how to make an alphabet from the Phoenicians. Remember, this is pulling out some stuff, but a long time ago when we talked about Mesopotamia, we talked about the Phoenicians and how their alphabet formed the base of the Greek alphabet and then the Roman alphabet and then our alphabet. So again, here is how it's progressing. So the Greeks took their alphabet, made their alphabet, which had 24 letters that stood for different sounds. And here is it. Here is how the letters kind of translate. All right, and Sparta. Love Sparta. Oops, I went too far. Okay. The Spartans lived in one of the fertile areas of southern Greece. They had mountains surrounding it. You can kind of see that in the background, but we're going to take a little Google Earth trip here in a second. You can kind of see the mountains in the background, but they are surrounded by mountains. It made it very hard to attack them. The Spartan government was a blend of rule by 2 kings, elected officials, and the ruling class. So again, it was an oligarchy. This is kind of what it would have looked like back in the day with the hills and everything around it, and then the civilization. This is what's left of the ruins. We're going to take a little trip to Sparta really quick so we can see what's left today a little bit better. So there's the Acropolis of ancient Sparta. Close that. Let's see if I can drop my little man in here so you can get a little better picture. So again, not really much left today, but this is the Acropolis. As you can see, there would have been the cities down here. There's some ruins that were dug up, but here's the highest point. So this is the Acropolis. Okay, and this is what's left of whatever they had built up there, which again, not too much is left. But look at the mountains in the back. This would have been a great, great natural protection for the people that lived here. It would have been a lot harder to cross, like those mountains are so high, the clouds are touching it. It would be really hard to get into Sparta from here. So I can see if I can drop my Pegman in the ruins down here so we can look a little bit closer. Here's some more ruins of ancient Sparta. As you can see, there's not too much left, but you can see there are, here's some columns and things that were left. Just not a ton. There are more columns. These are old places. There's way more left in Athens than in Sparta. So we're going back. Okay. Face down. All right. Okay, so under Sparta's oligarchy, 2 kings headed a council of elders, which is 28 citizens over age 60. The council's function was to present laws to an assembly. All Spartan men over age 30 belonged to the assembly and had to vote on council law. The Spartans' unique government helped keep a balance of power and stop revolts. So I just wanted to make sure that you see Council of Elders was 28 citizens over 60. And when we go through Sparta in a minute, kind of hard to get to that age in Sparta. All men over 30 were in the assembly. So the assembly kind of got together and met with the Council of Elders who would make decisions along with the 2 kings. And that would just be the assembly. Now, Sparta had slaves that they called helots. And their helots would have been a mix of people that they enslaved from wars, things like that. like other city-states, Sparta needed more land as it grew, but Sparta did not set up colonies. Sparta instead would conquer and enslave neighbors. Now, Sparta is a fighting colony. They love to fight. And we're going to talk about that in just a second, but they were definitely tried to make sure that they were ready for any kind of war. So they would go out in war, and when they would win, they would conquer the people in that land and make them slaves. They had a very rigid hierarchy. At the top was elite landowning families. In the middle were farmers and traders, and the lowest class were helots. So again, Spartans focused on military skill to conquer the people they controlled. They were very, very worried that the slaves would eventually revolt. So they always, their focus a lot of times was on making sure that that did not happen. But if you were a boy in Sparta, what you would do at 7 years old, you would be, actually, let's back up a minute. So the very first thing that would happen is when a woman would have a child, usually this happened with boys, but when a woman would have a child, it would be taken for inspection by like a head guy in the government. They would look at the baby, and if the baby had any kind of deformity, imperfection, seemed like it was mentally, not capable, they would take the baby and leave it out in the wild and wilderness. Sometimes those children would have been adopted by, found and adopted by other people in other areas. Most of the time, those babies would die of exposure from sitting out in the woods. But if you were the lucky children that made it through inspection, you would be returned to your family, where you would live with your family until 7. At 7, you became a ward of the state, which means you were no longer allowed to live with your family. This is for boys, remember. So at 7, you would have been taken away from your family and put into a training camp. Life in training camp, not very fun for boys. Of course, now they wanted to be there because in their mindset, going through being in training, being fierce, being strong is desirable. You want to be that way. So they take them at 7. They make them fight each other, make them fight adults. They don't feed them very much because, number one, you do not want to be overweight in a Spartan community. You would have been put down. You would have been just made to get back into normal size, let's put it that way. They desire athletic builds, strong, ready for anything. You walk around without shoes to make your feet tough so you can walk through any condition. They even have a ritual where they strap the boys up onto columns and they take the whips out and they whip the boys. The families will yell, don't fall, because the person that's standing strongest the longest or standing up the longest gets special awards and special privileges, and the families get bragging rights that they have the strongest boy. So, yeah, life in Sparta for a boy wouldn't be that great, in my opinion. No, maybe you really like fighting and you like military life, and this kind of sounds appealing to you. Not for me, but maybe for you. At age 20, you are finally allowed to be part of the army. So you could go into the army. You left the strict military training, but you could not leave the barracks. So if you got married in any of this time, you are not living with your wife. You are not allowed to. You have to stay in the barracks for 10 years. So a lot of times men would try to sneak away. And if they got caught, going to see their wife or whatever, they would have been strictly punished. And yeah, so that's how you have to live if you're a boy. At age 30, you can finally go and leave the barracks. You can go live at home, but you are still a member of the army. You had to be in the army until age 60. If you go to battle, you are expected to either you win or you come home dead. Okay, so you die. Either you win or you die. If you don't win, don't come home. That's kind of basically how it is in Sparta. So if you came home and you didn't win, you would not get a great welcome back to Sparta kind of ceremony. Now, life for a Spartan woman, not too bad. In fact, for me personally, This is just my opinion. If I had to choose between living in Athens and Sparta, I would probably choose Sparta as a woman. And we'll talk about why when we talk about Athens. But women were freer in Sparta than any other Greek area. They had to pretty much take care of everything. Remember, their husbands are gone until they're 30. And even after 30, they're gone a lot, let's be honest, because Spartans are fighters. So they're gone a lot fighting. So the people that are left are the women and the children. So the women have to be able to take care of things that they necessarily wouldn't have to if they were in Athens. So they stayed home while their husbands were at war or in the barracks. They could own property. They could go where they wanted to, when they wanted to. And in fact, they even got a little bit of education. Of course, with Sparta, most of women's education would have focused on, again, a lot of it in almost all these places is child rearing and things like that. But they also got gymnastics training, athletic training, different kinds of fighting training. The premise behind it was that it would make strong women who would make strong, healthy babies, which would help Sparta. So everything that the people do in Sparta is not for individuals, it's for the state. So you have children, not for you, but for the state. You get strong for not just you and not for children to be healthy for you, but to be healthy for the state. So everything you do is for Sparta. Sparta, yes, was very strong. Probably really hard to beat more, but their commitment to work came at a price. They fell behind other Greek areas in trade. Their knowledge of science was poor, and even other subjects like math, philosophy, astronomy, things like that, very low. Still, their soldiers would play a key role in defending Greece, and when we get to the wars, you will see how strong of a role they play. Okay, I'm going to link both of these videos into Google Classroom because if you're at home today, you will definitely want to watch these. These give you kind of a look at how life is for people in Sparta. This talks about the Spartan military training that boys would go through, and this is kind of talks about Spartan life. So I'll link those today for you. Your next goal is to go to your notebook, which is here, and you're going to go to slide 15. You're going to fill out information on military, education, government, and the role of women in Sparta. Then you're going to go to the Sparta acrostic, and you're going to fill it out. There's a video here if you need help and directions here. All right, have a great day.